Behind every great man, there's a great woman. It's a motto you've heard I don't know how many times, probably millions. Oh my, it's a motto that I don't like very much because I don't think a woman should stand behind a man. Who said that? On the other hand, gender equality exists not because it's a dictate from above, but because between a man and a woman, apart from the biological difference, what other difference is there? None. However, it must be said that some historical figures have loved women very much, not only their own wives, but also the wives of others, or other women who were free from constraints. This is the case with our protagonist today, a man who has made his mark in history clearly, not only through his love affairs, which have conditioned part of his existence, but especially through strong, decisive ideas, which have brought him into conflict with many very powerful figures, including a family member, the man who had given him his own daughter in marriage. Today we talk about an extremely fascinating historical figure. Today, Inside History brings you the life of Gian Galeazzo Ciano. They said great man, great woman, in fact, great women. In the life of Galeazzo Ciano, at least three are counted. One everyone knows is from Mussolini, the daughter of the Duce, the woman that Galeazzo Ciano married on April 24th, 1930. It was a strong bond, a blood tie with the most powerful man in Italy at that time, with the leader of fascism, with the dictator. It was also a way for some to advance their careers. Mussolini himself saw in Ciano his natural dolphin, the successor, the one who would take the reins of the dictatorship and fascism after he, Mussolini, would have passed on to a better life. This is what Mussolini thought before, obviously, the outbreak of the Second World War, of entering the war alongside Germany and everything that would happen afterwards. Ciano had different ideas than his father-in-law, and they would be seen over time. But let's get back to the women. Edda Mussolini, it was said, the woman that Ciano loved, that Ciano married, from whom he received so much, but she was not the only woman. There were at least two others. Indeed, because Ciano, before meeting Edda Mussolini, had already made a name for himself in the salons of the good bourgeoisie. He who had grown up between Annecia Livorno, Venetia, Genoa, who had found work in newspapers in Rome, Nuovo Paese, La Tribuna, then El Impero. He very much enjoyed attending the salon gatherings of the good bourgeoisie, both in Milan and Rome. He also liked to act, but he was not very successful. He especially liked the high life, the quality life, the good life. He also liked to associate with intelligent people, people who had something to say, to tell, something to convey. Ciano was an extremely curious person, in a positive sense. After graduating, he had started his diplomatic career, and that curiosity had taken him all the way to Rio de Janeiro, at the time the capital of Brazil, as a diplomatic attaché at the embassy. After his marriage to Edda Mussolini, he immediately left for a new diplomatic mission to Shanghai with the charge of Kosovo, and in Shanghai, Gian Galeazzo Ciano met the second woman of his life. But it was a fairly short adventure, as intense as it was. We have already come across that woman, Wallis Simpson, the woman for whom the future King Edward VIII of England would lose his head, the woman who would have made Edward VIII lose his crown, the woman who could have changed the face of history with her well-known racist sympathies if she had managed to be accepted by the London court and the Anglican Church. We've already made a video about her, which you can find on the channel. Ciano emerged from that adventure, it is said, marked because the scandalous chronicles of the Time report of an abortion by Wallis Simpson right in Shanghai. The son would have been Gian Galeazzo Ciano's, who, however, was not willing to recognize him. Also because it would have meant the breakup of his marriage with Ed, the breakup with his powerful father-in-law, and the end of his career. Wally Simpson preferred to abort. From that abortion, among other things, there were permanent signs called sterility. Ciano, on the other hand, returned from Shanghai after 3 years of diplomatic mission, obtaining ever greater career boosts. It was never understood whether Mussolini had been informed of Ciano's gallant and unfaithful adventures, or if he simply shrugged, knowing, in function of higher projects. What is certain is that Ciano made his career first as Under-Secretary to the Press, then as Minister for Propaganda, what would become the Minkolpop, the Ministry of Popular Culture, and subsequently as Foreign Minister, the youngest foreign minister in Italian history up to that point. Clear? Among other things, Ciano was not just a bon vivant, a womanizer, a man who loved cosmopolitanism. Ciano had very clear political ideas. Yes, Ciano appreciated fascism, but he was also a close friend of the Prince of Piedmont, Umberto di Savoia, the future king, Umberto II. It was a professor from the Polytechnic University of Turin who put them in contact. The friendship between the heir to the throne and the heir to fascism among the two dolphins would have led to something more, continuous contacts to decide Italian politics. Many observers indeed think that King Victor Emmanuel III simply let Mussolini have free rein, essentially preferring to ignore what was happening. It's not exactly like that. Victor Emmanuel III handed power to Mussolini because it was functional to the crown's own projects. These projects first and foremost envisage the animization of the turbulent period of the early 20s, then stability, a social and above all economic stability that would have come more than thanks to Mussolini. Thanks to Beneduce, another character we have already met. Find the video in the channel. Within this sphere, there was also a role for Umberto of Savoy, who did not so much dislike the dictatorship itself as certain dangerous relationships that Mussolini began to weave with other similar European realities. Ciano had intercepted these desires of the Prince of Piedmont and had made them his own. He often gladly discussed with Umberto. He was intimate with the same sovereign who would have awarded him the collar of the Annunciation for merits and services rendered to the same crown. What Ciano was trying to do within the fascist regime was to give an autonomous political physiognomy. What does it mean? To make Italian fascism an entity independent from other similar or related regimes, starting with Hitler's. In fact, Ciano became the main critic of Hitler and made his voice heard when a close friend of Mussolini, namely the Austrian Prime Minister Engelbert Dollfuss, whose family was on vacation in Italy, was assassinated in a putsch attempt by the Austrian Nazis. We have already talked about this in another video, which you can find on the channel until the last one, until the signing of the Steel Pact on May 22, 1939, a subscription to which Ciano was forced to sign with force. Ciano was the first detractor of Hitler within the fascist circles. Hitler himself, time and again, would criticize Ciano's position, at least on a couple of occasions, one of these in Berlin, during Mussolini's first visit to Germany. In 1937, Hitler would confide his fears to Mussolini and would have invited him to rethink the role of his son-in-law within the regime. Ciano did not love Hitler. Hitler hated Ciano. This is a well-established historical fact, and it leads us to the third woman in the story of Gian Galeazzo Ciano, a woman of many names. Her real name was Hildegard Burkhardt, but she was called Frau Felicitas Bez, a journalist, but above all a spy. A woman who, between the end of 1943 and the beginning of 1944, is entrusted with a very delicate mission. It's a mission that was commissioned by an officer, Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Udall, but has the high blessing of two of the major hierarchs of Nazism. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, the director of the Reichssicherheitsamt, that is the High Office for the Security of the Reich, and Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer of the SS. The mission is very delicate and involves an exchange, the life of Galeazzo Ciano in exchange for his diaries. Because Galeazzo Ciano, until the beginning of spring 1943, noted many details in his personal diaries. It's no mystery that he does this. Those records in which Ciano writes everything, especially the conversations he has with Fori-Betrop, with Mussolini, with the hierarchs, with the generals, with the ambassadors, even with the Holy See, all those dialogues are feared. feared especially in Berlin. What could happen if the content of those diaries, which is considered explosive, were to be disclosed? Mussolini, who has recently been released from the Campo Imperatore prison on the Gran Sasso, would essentially be downgraded to a sort of caricature. The true face of Hitler as a tyrant could be further shown to the world. This is what they fear in Berlin, so they must intervene. So they must make a trade between Ciano's life and his diaries. They have him in jail at the moment. Why? Because on July 25th, 1943, he voted in favor of the Grandi's agenda, the agenda that establishes the end of the fascist dictatorship and the return of full powers to the sovereign, to Victor Emmanuel III. Ciano and Grandi had already spoken in the days leading up to the Grand Council meeting. They had a precise plan, but it was ruined at the last minute because they had placed their hopes on Marshal Enrico Caviglia. Instead, the king, with a dramatic twist, prefers to call Badoglio, who is disliked by Grandi, but especially by Ciano, who perfectly reciprocates this sentiment. From the end of July 1943, Ciano knows that he and his family are in danger. At the end of August, when there are already rumors of a possible armistice, what will be the Cassabili armistice? Ciano decides to leave. He goes to Munich in Bavaria, Germany, but it's not his final destination. He goes to Germany because from there he wants to take a plane that will take him first to Switzerland and then to Spain, to safety. He entrusts the diaries to his wife, Edda. He knows that those documents are explosive, but from Germany. Ciano will never move. After September 8th, he will be arrested and subsequently extradited to Italy. A trial awaits him, the famous Verona trial. It's a very tough trial conducted against those hierarchs who had voted against Mussolini. There are few defendants at the bench because, after all, they couldn't possibly arrest all the hierarchs of July 25th. Ciano is with Marinelli, Gottardi, Pereschi, and Emilio de Bono, a quadrumvir. All the others are in contempt. The trial is heavy. It is conducted in an atmosphere of continuous threats and is dominated by the figure of Alessandro Pavolini, the so-called mother-in-law of the regime, a man who harbors a deep hatred for Ciano. And it is the same Pavolini who influences the trial, speaking with the judges separately and making them lean towards the only unanimous verdict. The death sentence of Galeazzo Ciano by 9 votes to 0, while in all other cases there had always been opposing votes. Why this vote? Because Pavolini aspired to take on the role of Telfino, of Ciano because Pavolini had never trusted him, of Ciano because Pavolini was the man who whispered in the Duce's ear to get rid of his traitors, starting with the traitor, who he had in his family, remembering Hitler's words to get rid of that dead weight. However, within the Verona trial, what will be called Operation Conte is inserted. The operation, studied in Berlin, aimed to free Galeazzo Ciano.
In exchange
of his diaries of this operation are entrusted, as we said, an officer, the lieutenant colonel.
And Hildegard.
Burkhardt, who calls herself Felicitas Beth. Call her Burkhardt, call her Beth. The woman visits Galeazzo Ciano in prison several times. She is in love with him. She is his third woman, the third woman of his life. Gonciero confronts, exposes the escape plan, exposes the opportunities offered by Nazi Germany. The plan involves a specially trained Waffen SS commando arriving in Verona, making contact with the local command, gaining the complicity of some of the jailers, faking a prison uprising, and facilitating Ciano's escape, who would then be taken to safety and allowed to emigrate. In exchange, Ciano must tell his wife Edda, who is safe, to hand over the diaries. The operation is agreed upon in every single detail. Edda, Mussolini, and Ciano beats at least 2, perhaps even 3 times. On that occasion, the German spy confesses to Edda and Ciano that she is madly in love with her husband. Edda maintains great composure throughout all this because she, too, is in love with Galeazzo and wants to save him. And she knows that the only way to save him is those documents. So she hands over a first part to ensure its credibility. On December 28, 1943, Traubes speaks with General Arstal, who gets in touch with Berlin. The next day, a positive response arrives. Kaltenbrunner and Himmler give the green light with a telegram. They can proceed, however, the plan begins to encounter some hitches. On January 1st, 1944, Kaltenbrunner wants the original diaries, at least a part of them. Edda delivers the first part to Kaltenbrunner, keeping a copy for herself. He is satisfied with the delivery. He authorizes the Waffen-SS commando's arrival in Verona. Operation Conte begins, but remains unfinished. Why? Because when there are only 72 hours left to the execution, which will take place on January 11th, 1944, a contrary order arrives, and it is an order signed by Adolf Hitler. Hitler, who had been kept in the dark until the last about Operation Conte, finds out, gets furious, and bypasses all his hierarchs. Ciano must die. No one has the courage to tell the Führer that the risk is that the widow might disclose the diaries. Ciano must die. He betrayed Mussolini and is a fierce opponent of Hitler. He is perhaps Hitler's main enemy within Italian fascism. On January 9th, 1944, Operation Colt is aborted. In tears, Bez goes one last time to the Scalzi prison in Verona. She asks to see Galeazzo Ciano and tells him that there is nothing more to be done. Ciano remains all things considered calm. In front of Beza, he writes a letter to his wife and asks her to take it to Edda. Mrs. Beza would like to stay there with Ciano, but she can't. The only thing left for her to do is to witness the last transfer from the prison to the Porta Polygon.
Chain where
The date and place for the execution have been set. When he delivers Galeazzo Ciano's last letter to Edda, Frau Bez will say goodbye, once again reaffirming his love. Even later, speaking with Ciano's mother, Countess Carolina, Bez said, "I loved Galeazzo, and I still love him. He was the greatest love of my life." The third woman to fall victim to the charm of Gian Galeazzo Ciano, a charm that, however, does not save Ciano from bullets. On the morning of January 11th, 1944, along with the other four sentenced to death, Ciano is tied to a chair. His back is exposed to the execution squad. It's a truly barbaric choice, because it doesn't expose the condemned to a quick death. The execution squad can't aim at vital organs. In fact, all the condemned will require the coup de grace. In the case of Ciano, even 2 bullets to the head. Thus dies Gian Galeazzo Ciano, Count of Cortellazzo, former son-in-law of Mussolini, internal opponent of Hitler in Italian fascism. He dies like this, 2 bullets in the head. He dies leaving a message to the chaplain. "Let my children know that I die without resentment for anyone. We are all overwhelmed in the same storm." His diaries, which will be published later, will be the most faithful fresco of Mussolini's leaves, of the stupidities committed by the Duce in the management, especially of Italian foreign policy, not to mention the suicidal choices in military matters. The diaries of Galeazzo Ciano, unlike the alleged diaries of Mussolini, which are still debated today in terms of historical and textual reliability, are today a document that, although criticized by some historians, such as David Ehring, constitute an exceptional document. They allow us to dig into what was Italian fascism, discovering its vices, deviations, contradictions, sometimes incomprehensible choices. Galeazzo Ciano has also been judged as an opportunist, a careerist, a man who would have exploited his charm, his education, his excellent culture, his influence over women, starting with Edda Mussolini, just to advance his career. In reality, Edda herself said that her husband had only 2 great passions, only 2 great people to inspire him. One was his father, Costanzo, an admiral and great war hero. The other was Mussolini himself. Ciano would have been deeply disappointed by Mussolini's turn towards Hitler, even though he tried until the end to convince him to break away, not to get dragged into the madness of the Second World War. But he couldn't do much more. Ciano, Galeazzo Ciano, Count of Cortellazzo, the man who could have changed the history of Italy and who tried in so many ways with diplomacy, with palace chatter, with friendships with the Prince of Piedmont, even with the choice to side with the greats in the dramatic meeting of July 25th, 43. A man who loved three women, one who could have become Queen of England, another who could have saved his life, and finally the one who collected his true legacy represented by the Diaries, represented by the historical figure, represented by the memory of a man who lived a reckless life, a life divided between fascist or base and the will to give a future to Italy. A man named Gian Galeazzo Ciano. Have you already heard about our monthly newsletter? I hope so. If you haven't registered yet, there's still time. You can do it through our Inside History website and get our exclusive content in your mailbox every month for free. What's inside? Well, I might as well not tell you, but this time I'll spoil it. So you will find a themed editorial, a story, one of our great written stories. Then you will find a monthly timeline, very, very interesting, with the main events marked day by day, one a day, referring to events of
Contemporary history.
Then you will have our reading recommendations, viewing our videos, but also films, television series, and much more. And also some of our nice gadgets that you can purchase through our portal. What else can I say to convince you? The newsletter is free. Give it a try. Thanks to everyone